I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of heavy machinery on my property, and when I looked out my bedroom window, I saw a full construction crew tearing through my north pasture with excavators and graders. My heart nearly stopped as I watched them rip up 100-year-old oak trees and level the natural terrain I'd spent 15 years preserving. I threw on jeans and boots, not even bothering with a shirt, and sprinted across my ranch toward the destruction. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted at the nearest worker, a young guy operating a backhoe. He couldn't hear me over the engine noise, so I waved my arms until he finally shut it down. "Making a trail," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. HOA contract. "This is private property, my property. Vincent Quentin, I own this land." I gestured to the 400 acres surrounding us, my cattle ranch that had been in my family since the 1920s. The worker shrugged and pulled out a worn piece of paper. "Says here the Prairie Vista HOA approved a community walking trail through this section, got the permits and everything." I snatched the paper from his hands. Sure enough, there were official-looking stamps and signatures, including one from someone named Brenda Patterson, HOA president. The trail diagram showed a 2-mile loop cutting directly through my property, connecting the new subdivision that had sprouted up on what used to be the Henderson farm about a mile east of my land. "This is insane," I muttered, pulling out my phone. "You need to stop right now. This is illegal trespassing and property destruction." The foreman walked over, a thick-necked guy with a clipboard. "We got legal authorization, buddy. Take it up with the HOA if you got a problem." "I'm not in any HOA," I said. "I'm a cattle rancher. This land has never been part of any housing development." The foreman looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Look, man, I just do what I'm told. We got paid to build a trail, so that's what we're doing. You need to call the number on that paper." I took photos of everything: the equipment, the destruction, the workers, and especially that fraudulent document. Then I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez arrived 30 minutes later, and by then the crew had already paved a quarter-mile section with fresh asphalt. "Vincent, what's going on?" Martinez asked. We'd known each other since high school. I explained the situation, showing him the document and pointing out that my property deed had no HOA covenant. Martinez examined the paperwork, called his supervisor, and after another hour of bureaucratic runaround, told me what I didn't want to hear. "The permits look legitimate on the surface," he said. "You're going to need a lawyer. This is civil, not criminal, unless you can prove the documents are forged. So they can just destroy my property while I wait for a court date?" Martinez grimaced. "I'll file a report, but yeah, basically. Get an emergency injunction if you can." The crew worked until sunset. By the time they left, they'd carved a 6-foot-wide asphalt trail through my best grazing land, destroying 3 oak trees that were older than anyone alive and disrupting my cattle's normal patterns. My prize Angus bull, Duke, was so agitated he'd kicked through a fence section trying to get away from the noise. I spent that evening on the phone with lawyers. Most couldn't see me for weeks. Finally, I got through to Robert Chen, a property attorney in Austin who'd handled ranch disputes before. He agreed to see me first thing Wednesday morning, but warned me that emergency injunctions were difficult to obtain and expensive to pursue. "They did this fast for a reason," Chen said. "The HOA probably knows that once the trail is built, courts are more reluctant to order its removal. Possession is 9/10 of the law, even when the possession is illegal." I barely slept that night. At dawn, I walked the entire trail they'd built, documenting every detail. The asphalt was already curing, and they'd installed reflective markers every 50 feet. At both ends, where the trail connected to the subdivision roads, they'd put up cheerful signs: "Prairie Vista Community Trail, enjoy nature responsibly." Enjoy nature. They'd destroyed nature to build their trail through it. At Chen's office in Austin, I spread out my property deed, tax records, and photos across his conference table. He studied everything carefully, making notes on a legal pad. "You're right that you're not part of the HOA," Chen said. "Your property predates the subdivision by decades, but look at this." He pointed to a section of the HOA's filing documents. "They claimed eminent domain through a county park easement program." "What does that mean?" It means they told the county this would be a public recreational trail, got approval under a program designed for park development, then built it through your land. The county probably never verified you'd agreed to it. That's fraud, I said. But yes, but proving it and getting the trail removed are two different things. We'll need to file suit against both the HOA and the county, challenge the permits, and request immediate injunctive relief. I'm talking $50,000 minimum in legal fees, probably more. I thought about my savings, the ranch's operating budget, and the fact that cattle prices had been down for 6 months. How long? 6 months if we're lucky, 2 years if they fight hard, and Vincent, they will fight hard. HOAs have legal defense funds specifically for this kind of thing. I thanked Chen and told him I'd think about it. On the drive back to my ranch outside Fredericksburg, Texas, I passed the Prairie Vista subdivision. It was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked identical, with strict rules about fence heights and mailbox colors. I'd seen the HOA notices posted on their community board before, warnings about trash cans left out too long, fines for unapproved landscaping, threats about parking violations. The kind of place where people moved to feel superior about their property values while surrendering every ounce of personal freedom. When I got home, there were people on my trail. A woman in expensive yoga pants was power walking with hand weights. A man had 2 golden retrievers off leash and they were chasing my cattle. A teenage kid was riding a dirt bike, tearing up the trail edges. I drove my truck across the trail to block it and got out. "This is private property," I announced. "You're all trespassing." The yoga woman stopped and put her hands on her hips. "This is a community trail. It's for everyone." "It's on my ranch, my private cattle ranch." "Well, the HOA says we can use it," she replied. "If you have a problem, take it up with them. I pay HOA dues specifically for amenities like this." The man with the dogs finally got them under control. "Are you saying we can't walk here?" "I'm saying you're on private property without permission. That's trespassing." The teenage kid on the dirt bike revved his engine. "Whatever, dude. It's a public trail." He sped off before I could stop him. I spent the next hour confronting people and turning them away, but as soon as I dealt with one group, another appeared. There must have been 20 people using the trail that afternoon. By evening, I was exhausted and furious. That's when Brenda Patterson showed up. She arrived in a white Mercedes SUV, stepping out in a pantsuit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Brenda was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, blonde hair and a sharp bob, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Quentin? I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Prairie Vista HOA. I understand there's been some confusion." "No confusion," I said. "You built an illegal trail through my property, and I want it removed." Brenda's smile tightened. "The trail was built according to all proper legal channels. We have permits from the county parks department. Everything is completely legitimate. I never gave you permission to cross my land. The easement program doesn't require individual landowner permission when it serves the greater community good," Brenda said smoothly. "This trail provides valuable recreational access for our residents and promotes healthy living. Surely you can appreciate that." "I appreciate my property rights." "Remove the trail." Brenda sighed like I was a difficult child. "Mr. Quentin, I understand you're upset about the change, but Prairie Vista is a growing community, and we need amenities that support our property values. This trail is an investment in our neighborhood." "Your neighborhood is over there," I pointed east. "This is my ranch." "The county disagrees," Brenda said, "and I should warn you that if you continue to harass our residents who are simply trying to enjoy a public trail, we'll be forced to file a restraining order. We've already had 3 complaints about your aggressive behavior this afternoon." "Aggressive?" "I told trespassers to leave my property." "Their property, according to the county permits." Brenda pulled out her phone. "I have photos from Mrs. Henderson showing you blocking the trail with your vehicle and yelling at her while she was exercising. That's intimidation, Mr. Quentin." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They'd illegally built on my land, and now they were threatening me with legal action for objecting to it. "Get off my property," I said quietly. Brenda smiled again. "I'm on a public trail easement, but I'll leave, since we clearly can't have a productive conversation right now. I suggest you consult with an attorney. You'll find that everything we've done is perfectly legal. Good evening." She drove away, and I stood there in the fading light, looking at the asphalt scar cutting through my ranch. I thought about Chen's warning that removing the trail could take years and cost more than I had. I thought about Brenda's smug certainty that she'd won. Then, I thought about my grandfather, who'd built this ranch from nothing during the Depression. He'd fought drought, disease, and banks that wanted to foreclose. He'd never backed down from anyone. I made some phone calls. My cousin Derek owned a welding and fabrication shop in Johnson City. He owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move 2 years ago, and I was calling it in. I need gates," I told him. "Heavy steel gates, the kind that don't move unless you want them to." "How many?" "2, big enough to block a 6-foot trail. And Derek? I need them tomorrow." "Tomorrow? Vincent, that's not much notice. I'll pay double your normal rate. Cash?" There was a pause. "What are you planning?" "Protecting my property." Derek knew better than to ask more questions. "I'll have them ready by noon." Next, I called my friend Marcus Webb, who owned the hardware store in Fredericksburg. "I need the best padlocks you've got, 6 of them, and some concrete anchors rated for serious weight." Building something? Securing something. I spent Wednesday morning preparing. I marked exactly where the trail entered and exited my property, using my surveyor's map to make sure I was on solid legal ground. The trail crossed my land for approximately 1.3 miles. Everything in that section belonged to me, regardless of what the HOA claimed. Derek delivered the gates at 1 in the afternoon. They were beautiful, in a brutal sort of way, 10 feet wide, 8 feet tall, made from steel tubing that would stop a truck. Each had mounting brackets that could be bolted into concrete foundations. "You really doing what I think you're doing?" Derek asked as we unloaded them from his truck. "Yep. You're going to have the whole subdivision after you." They should have thought about that before they paved through my ranch. Derek helped me set the foundations. We jackhammered holes, set the steel posts in concrete, and let it cure while we grabbed dinner at a barbecue place in town. By 10 that night, the concrete was solid enough. We bolted the gates into place, one at each end of the trail where it entered my property. Then, I locked them with the heavy-duty padlocks Marcus had sold me, using 2 locks on each gate for redundancy. "There," I said, stepping back to admire our work. "Trail's closed," Derek whistled. "You know they were going to lose their minds." "Looking forward to it." Derek left around midnight. I stayed up, sitting on my porch with a thermos of coffee and Duke lying at my feet. I wanted to be there when the first morning walkers discovered what I'd done. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:15 Thursday morning, I heard shouting from the eastern gate. I walked over with my coffee, Duke trotting beside me, and found 4 people standing in front of the locked gate, staring at it like it had appeared from another dimension. "Morning," I said. A man in running gear turned to me, his face red. "What is this? You can't block a public trail." "It's not a public trail. It's my private property, and you're not welcome on it." "The HOA built this trail," a woman said. She was wearing the same expensive yoga outfit from yesterday. "We have every right to use it." "No, you don't. This is my land, and I'm exercising my property rights to exclude trespassers." "This is ridiculous," the running man sputtered. "I'm calling the HOA." "You do that." They made their calls, and I went back to my porch. Over the next hour, more people showed up at both gates, creating small, angry crowds. My phone started ringing at 7. Brenda Patterson, naturally. I didn't answer. She called 4 more times before finally leaving a voicemail. "Mr. Quentin, this is Brenda Patterson. You need to remove those gates immediately. You're interfering with a legal public easement and denying access to community amenities. This is unacceptable, and the HOA will take legal action if you don't comply by end of business today." I saved the voicemail and went about my morning routine. I had cattle to feed, fences to check, and work to do. The HOA drama could wait. Drama. By 9, there were deputies at my front gate. Martinez was back, along with his supervisor, Sergeant Kim. "Vincent, we got multiple calls about you blocking a trail," Kim said. I invited them in and laid out my documentation, property deed, survey maps, tax records showing continuous ownership, and the original HOA documents proving I'd never been part of their association. They built this trail without my permission, I explained, on my private property. Those gates are on my land, blocking access to my land. Kim studied the documents carefully. What about this county easement? I never signed any easement agreement. They filed the paperwork claiming I had, or claiming they didn't need my permission. Either way, it's fraudulent. Martinez looked uncomfortable. Vincent's right. I checked this morning. There's no signed easement from him in the county records. Kim rubbed his face. This is a mess. Okay, Mr. Quentin, from what I can see, you're within your rights to gate your own property. But I have to warn you, the HOA is threatening to file charges for destruction of public property. What public property? The asphalt they illegally poured on my land? Their permits say it's a public trail. Their permits are based on fraud. Kim nodded slowly. You're probably right. But this is civil, not criminal. You'll have to sort it out in court. Meanwhile, the gates stay? Unless a judge orders otherwise, yes, it's your property. The deputies left, and I felt a small surge of victory. It wouldn't last, I knew that. But for now, I'd made my point. Brenda showed up again that afternoon, this time with 2 other people. A thin man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Foster, HOA vice president, and a heavy-set woman named Sharon Lewis, HOA treasurer. Mr. Quentin, Brenda began, her voice icy. You're in violation of county code by blocking a designated public trail. We're here to give you one final opportunity to remove those gates before we pursue legal action. Sue me, I said. You built on my land without permission. Those gates are staying. Gerald stepped forward, trying to sound reasonable. Let's all calm down. Mr. Quentin, we understand your frustration. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. What kind of compromise? The HOA is prepared to offer you $5,000 as a one-time easement payment in exchange for your agreement to allow the trail to remain. I almost laughed. $5,000? You destroyed $15,000 worth of timber and grazing land, disrupted my cattle operation, and you think $5,000 makes it right? Sharon jumped in. That's more than fair. The trail increases property values for the entire area, including your ranch. I don't care about property values. I care about running my ranch without subdivisions dumping their traffic through my pastures. We're trying to be neighborly, Brenda said, but if you refuse to cooperate, we'll file an injunction to have those gates removed, and we'll sue you for the cost of replacing any trail damage you've caused. Good luck with that. I've got a property attorney on speed dial, and he's very interested in your fraudulent easement claims. Brenda's expression finally cracked, showing real anger underneath. You're making an enemy of an entire community, Mr. Quentin. Prairie Vista has 300 homes. That's hundreds of families you're antagonizing with this selfish behavior. All because you can't handle a small inconvenience. Small inconvenience? You tore through my property like you owned it. We had legal authorization, Brenda insisted. Show me my signature on any easement document. Show me any proof I agreed to this. The 3 of them exchanged glances. Gerald cleared his throat. The county easement program allows for trails that serve the public good, even when they cross private land. Your individual consent isn't required under Texas Property Code section. Don't quote legal code at me that doesn't exist, I interrupted. I've done my homework. Texas has some of the strongest private property protections in the country. You can't take an easement without compensation and agreement from the landowner, period. Whatever code you think gives you that authority, you're wrong. We argued for another 20 minutes, getting nowhere. Finally, they left with more threats about lawsuits and legal action. That evening, I got a call from Chen, my attorney. Vincent, I just got served with a civil complaint. The HOA is suing you for injunctive relief and damages related to the gates. How much? They're asking for $50,000 in damages to the trail, plus a court order forcing you to remove the gates and keep them removed. $50,000? I put up 2 gates. They're claiming lost amenity value to their homeowners, damage to the asphalt from people having to turn around, and emotional distress. It's a garbage claim, but we'll have to fight it. When's the hearing? 2 weeks. They filed for expedited review, claiming emergency circumstances. And Vincent, there's something else. They've filed a criminal complaint with the county attorney, claiming you destroyed public property. You're kidding. I wish I was. It probably won't go anywhere, but it shows they're playing hardball. So am I. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Someone I suspected, HOA residents, though I couldn't prove it, vandalized my gates with spray paint. They wrote things like public trail and selfish across the steel. I repainted the gates and installed security cameras. My mailbox got knocked over twice. I found nails scattered across my driveway. Someone left a dead deer on my front porch with a note, "Keep being difficult and see what happens." I took everything to the sheriff's office. Martinez filed reports, but there wasn't much they could do without catching someone in the act. Then, my cattle started getting out. Fences that had been fine for years suddenly had sections cut or pulled down. I'd spend hours rounding up my herd, only to find another break the next day. It was clearly deliberate sabotage, but again, I had no proof. The security cameras helped. I caught a middle-aged man cutting my fence on a Tuesday night. The footage was clear enough to identify him Carl Henderson, who lived in Prairie Vista and was apparently Mrs. Henderson's husband, the woman Brenda had mentioned. I called the sheriff's office immediately. Deputies arrested Henderson the next morning. He was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. At his arraignment, he claimed he was just trying to fix the fence, but the video clearly showed him cutting the wire with bolt cutters. Henderson was released on bond, and that should have been the end of it. But the HOA rallied around him. Brenda sent out a neighborhood email, which someone leaked to me, calling Henderson a community hero who was standing up to property abuse. They started a legal defense fund for him. The preliminary injunction hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning. I met Chen at the Gillespie County Courthouse, and we walked in to find Brenda and at least 30 Prairie Vista residents filling the gallery. They'd coordinated their outfits to wear matching green T-shirts that said, "Save Our Trail." The HOA's attorney was a slick guy from San Antonio named Richard Marks. He immediately launched into a presentation about community benefits, recreational value, and the legal validity of the county easement. "Your Honor, the trail serves 300 families," Marks argued. "It provides safe access to nature, promotes public health, and was constructed according to all applicable regulations. Mr. Quentin's gates are a vindictive obstruction that harms the entire community." Chen countered with our evidence, my property deed, the lack of any signed easement, and the timeline showing the HOA had built the trail without even attempting to contact me first. "Your Honor, this is straightforward property law," Chen said. "Mr. Quentin owns the land. He never granted an easement. The county's permit was issued based on false information provided by the HOA. My client has every right to exclude trespassers from his private property." The judge, a stern woman named Helena Rodriguez, reviewed the documents for what felt like an eternity. "I'm going to make a preliminary ruling," Judge Rodriguez finally said. "Mr. Marks, I'm troubled by the lack of documentation showing Mr. Quentin's consent. The easement filing suggests landowner notification occurred, but I see no evidence of that in the record. Your Honor, under the county's park development program..." "I've read the code, Mr. Marks, and Texas property law requires meaningful notice and opportunity to contest. I'm not convinced that happened here. However, I'm also mindful that a trail has been constructed and is in use." My stomach dropped. I knew it was coming. I knew it. "I'm going to deny the HOA's motion for preliminary injunction," Judge Rodriguez continued. "The gates may remain for now. However, I'm also ordering expedited discovery and setting a full hearing for 4 weeks from today. Both sides will have the opportunity to present complete evidence. Until then, Mr. Quentin, your gates stay. HOA, your trail remains built. We'll sort out the ultimate remedy at the full hearing." It was a split decision. I got to keep my gates, but the legal battle was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Brenda confronted me with reporters present. Somehow she'd gotten local news interested in the story. "This is a travesty," Brenda told the cameras. "One selfish rancher is denying an entire community access to a trail that benefits everyone. We followed every legal requirement, and now we're being punished because Mr. Quentin doesn't want people near his property." The reporter turned to me. "Mr. Quentin, why won't you let your neighbors use the trail?" "Because it's my property," I said simply. "They built it without permission. If someone built a highway through your backyard without asking, would you be okay with it?" But the HOA says they have legal permits. Permits obtained through false information. I never agreed to any easement. The story ran that evening on the local news, and by the next morning, it had been picked up by the Austin station. Suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters across Texas. The story had struck a nerve. Property rights, HOA overreach, rural versus suburban conflict. Everyone had an opinion. Social media exploded. Half the comments supported me, calling the HOA tyrannical and praising my defense of property rights. The other half called me a selfish jerk who was blocking public access to nature. I didn't have social media accounts myself, but friends kept sending me screenshots. A journalist from the Austin American-Statesman came out to interview me. Her name was Paula Martinez, no relation to Deputy Martinez, and she spent 3 hours walking my property, examining the trail, and documenting the damage. "This is a bigger story than just one trail," Paula said. HOAs across Texas have been expanding their authority, sometimes beyond what the law allows. Your case could set important precedent. Her article ran that Sunday, laying out the full timeline and including photos of the damage to my property. It was fair and balanced, which somehow made the HOA look even worse. The comment section filled with horror stories from other Texans who'd fought their own HOAs over property issues. But the publicity brought new problems. Protesters from Prairie Vista started showing up at my gates, carrying signs and chanting about public access. They weren't threatening, but having 40 people camped at my property line all day was disruptive and stressful. My cattle were agitated constantly. Duke got in a fight with a protester's dog that had wandered onto my property, and I had to pay the vet bill for both animals. My phone rang nonstop with reporters, supporters, critics, and random people wanting to share their opinions. I tried to focus on ranch work, but it was nearly impossible. Every day brought some new crisis related to the trail dispute. The stress was affecting everything: my sleep, my appetite, my ability to concentrate on the business that actually paid my bills. Then things got dangerous. One night, I was woken by the sound of breaking glass. I grabbed the shotgun I kept in my bedroom and went to investigate. Someone had thrown a brick through my living room window. Attached to the brick was a note: "Remove the gates or else." I called the sheriff's office, and Martinez came out to file another report. The brick and note were bagged as evidence, but we both knew the chances of finding who'd thrown it were slim. "Vincent, this is getting out of hand," Martinez said. "Maybe you should consider the HOA's offer, just for your own safety. If I back down now, they win. Every rancher, every property owner in Texas who's fighting an HOA will lose ground." Is it worth getting hurt over? I didn't have a good answer for that. The vandalism continued. My truck's tires were slashed. Someone poured sugar in my tractor's gas tank, causing $1,500 in engine damage. I came home one afternoon to find all my mailbox posts pulled up and thrown in my pond. I increased security, more cameras, better lighting, and I started sleeping in shifts, basically napping for a few hours at a time so I could patrol regularly. My friend Jackson Reyes, who owned the neighboring ranch to the west, started coming over to help watch the place at night. "This is crazy," Jackson said as we sat on my porch one night, watching the gates through binoculars. "They're acting like you're the criminal." That's how HOAs work. They think their rules matter more than actual law. You need to end this before someone gets seriously hurt. I'm not backing down. The full hearing was approaching, and Chen spent hours preparing our case. We had survey reports, property records, expert testimony from a land use attorney, and documentation of every incident of vandalism and harassment. The HOA prepared their own case, and based on what Chen could discover through the legal process, they were going hard on the public benefit angle. They had petitions signed by 200 Prairie Vista residents supporting the trail. They had appraisals claiming the trail increased property values by an average of $15,000 per home. They had testimony from doctors about the health benefits of walking trails. What they didn't have was my signature on an easement agreement, because it didn't exist. 3 days before the hearing, I got an unexpected visitor. His name was Thomas Quaid, and he was a commissioner for Gillespie County. "Mr. Quentin, I wanted to speak with you privately," Quaid said. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. About the trail? About how the permits were issued. I wasn't on the commission when they voted on the Prairie Vista Trail easement, but I've reviewed the records. I have concerns. We sat at my kitchen table, and Quaid pulled out a folder. The HOA's application claimed they had landowner consent, Quaid explained. They submitted an affidavit stating all affected property owners had been notified and given opportunity to comment. But there's no documentation of any notice sent to you. Because they never sent one. I believe you, and I think the HOA knowingly provided false information to obtain those permits. That's fraud, Mr. Quentin. Criminal fraud. My pulse quickened. Can you prove it? I can testify about the irregularities in the permitting process, and I've already referred the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. They're reviewing whether charges should be filed against the HOA board members. This changed everything. If the HOA had committed fraud to get the permits, it wasn't just a civil property dispute anymore. It was a criminal matter. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Quaid smiled grimly. Because I'm tired of HOAs treating county government like their personal approval stamp. They bully staff, they manipulate processes, and they act like they're above the law. It's time someone held them accountable. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning, and the courthouse was packed. Judge Rodriguez had moved us to the largest courtroom to accommodate everyone who wanted to watch. Chen presented our case methodically. He walked through my property ownership history, the lack of any easement agreement, and the timeline of how the trail was constructed without my knowledge or consent. He called me to testify about discovering the construction and my subsequent attempts to resolve the situation. Mr. Quentin, did you ever receive any notification from the HOA about their trail plans? Chen asked. Never. Not a letter, not an email, not a phone call. Nothing. Did you ever attend any HOA meetings where the trail was discussed? I'm not part of the HOA. I've never attended any of their meetings. Did you ever sign any document granting an easement across your property? Absolutely not. Marks cross-examined me aggressively, trying to paint me as an unreasonable neighbor who refused to accommodate any community needs. Mr. Quentin, isn't it true you profit from the same roads, utilities, and infrastructure that the Prairie Vista development brought to this area? Marks asked. My ranch has been here since 1920. Prairie Vista showed up 5 years ago. But you use the county roads they helped fund. You benefit from the increased tax base. I pay my taxes. I maintain my own property. I don't owe them access to my land just because we share a county. You're being deliberately difficult about a trail that harms nothing and helps hundreds of people. It harms my property, my cattle operation, and my privacy. And it's illegal. Marks called several Prairie Vista residents to testify about how much they valued the trail. A mother talked about walking with her children. A retiree discussed his daily exercise routine. A doctor gave statistics about obesity and the importance of recreational access. None of it addressed the central legal question. Did the HOA have the right to build on my property without permission? Then, Commissioner Quaid took the stand. Chen questioned him about the permitting process, and Quaid laid out every irregularity in detail. The rushed approval, the missing documentation of landowner notice, the affidavit claiming I'd been contacted when no evidence of contact existed. In your professional opinion, Commissioner, were proper procedures followed? Chen asked. No, the HOA should never have received approval without documented evidence of landowner consent. What should have happened? The application should have been denied, and the HOA should have been told to negotiate an easement agreement with Mr. Quentin directly. If they couldn't reach an agreement, they could have pursued condemnation proceedings, but that requires a higher threshold of public necessity and fair compensation. Marks tried to discredit Quaid on cross-examination, suggesting he had a personal bias against HOAs. Quaid didn't budge. My bias is toward following the law, Mr. Marks. The law requires notice and due process. That didn't happen here. The hearing lasted all day. By the time both sides rested, it was after 5 p.m. Judge Rodriguez said she'd issue a written ruling within a week. I spent that week in anxious limbo, trying to keep up with ranch work while constantly checking my phone for updates from Chen. The ruling came down on Tuesday afternoon. Chen called me immediately. "We won," he said. "Complete victory." I had to sit down. "What?" Judge Rodriguez found that the easement permits were improperly issued due to lack of landowner notification. She's voided them entirely. The trail is illegal, and the HOA has to remove it. Remove it? The whole thing? Every inch that crosses your property. They have 60 days to tear up the asphalt and restore your land to its previous condition. If they don't, you're authorized to do it yourself and bill them for the cost. What about their lawsuit against me? Dismissed with prejudice. You're awarded attorney's fees and costs. They have to pay for everything. I felt dizzy with relief. Chen, I don't know what to say. Say you'll never let an HOA push you around again. This is going to set precedent, Vincent. You just made case law. The written order arrived the next day. It was comprehensive, 32 pages detailing every reason why the HOA had acted improperly and why my property rights took precedence over their desired amenities. Judge Rodriguez's conclusion was particularly satisfying. This court holds that no amount of community benefit or public desire can override fundamental property rights protected by the Constitution and Texas law. The HOA's actions constituted a taking without due process or just compensation, and their subsequent legal positions bordered on frivolous. Mr. Quentin is entitled to full remediation and damages. The story exploded in the media. The Austin Statesman ran it as front-page news. Rancher defeats HOA in property rights battle. Other outlets picked it up. I got interview requests from Houston, Dallas, even national news programs. I mostly declined, except for one interview with Paula Martinez for her follow-up article. I wanted the story told right. "How does it feel?" Paula asked. Paula, like justice finally, but it shouldn't have taken this much fighting. The HOA should never have built that trail without permission in the first place. What happens now? They remove the trail, restore my property, and hopefully learn that they can't just take what doesn't belong to them. But the HOA wasn't done fighting. Brenda held a community meeting and declared they'd appeal the decision. According to the meeting notes someone sent me, she claimed Judge Rodriguez was biased, and the ruling was an attack on community rights. The appeal was filed a week later. Chen assured me it was unlikely to succeed. The judge's ruling was thorough and well supported by law, but it meant more delays and uncertainty. Then the district attorney's office made their move. On a Wednesday morning, 2 investigators from the DA showed up at Brenda Patterson's house with a warrant. They seized HOA records, emails, and financial documents. The same thing happened at Gerald Foster's office and Sharon Lewis's home. The investigation Commissioner Quaid had initiated was now active and serious. I learned later that the investigators had found email chains between Brenda and the HOA's attorney discussing how to handle the county permitting process. In one email, Brenda explicitly acknowledged they hadn't notified me, but suggested they could claim we tried if it came up later. That was evidence of intentional fraud. The DA, a no-nonsense prosecutor named Elizabeth Valdez, convened a grand jury. 3 weeks later, indictments were handed down. Brenda Patterson, Gerald Foster, and Sharon Lewis were each charged with 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of making a false statement to a government entity. If convicted, they faced up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines. The arraignment was a spectacle. All 3 defendants showed up with expensive attorneys, pleading not guilty and calling the charges politically motivated. But the evidence was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the HOA had to comply with Judge Rodriguez's order. They hired a different construction company, not the one they'd used originally to remove the trail. I supervised every step, making sure they didn't cause additional damage. It took 2 weeks to tear up all the asphalt and haul it away. The company did decent work restoring the ground underneath, though it would take years for the land to fully recover. The oak trees they'd destroyed were gone forever, which still made me angry. The HOA tried to bill their insurance for the removal costs, but apparently their policy didn't cover illegal construction projects. The final tab came to $90,000, which the HOA had to assess their members to cover. I heard through the grapevine that this caused a massive rebellion within Prairie Vista. Homeowners were furious about the special assessment and started demanding accountability from the board. Several residents filed suit against the HOA for mismanagement. Brenda, Gerald, and Sharon all resigned from the board. New leadership took over, and one of their first actions was to withdraw the appeal of Judge Rodriguez's ruling and issue a public apology to me. I accepted the apology but didn't respond otherwise. I just wanted to be left alone. The criminal trial took longer to resolve. The defendants tried various legal maneuvers to get the charges dismissed, but DA Valdez held firm. Eventually, faced with the email evidence and testimony from multiple witnesses, including County Commissioner Quaid and several employees from the County Planning Office, the defendants accepted plea deals. Brenda Patterson pleaded guilty to fraud and making false statements. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with 18 months suspended, meaning she'd serve 6 months in county jail. She also had to pay $50,000 in restitution and fines. Gerald Foster and Sharon Lewis received similar sentences, though Gerald got probation instead of jail time because he cooperated more fully with the investigation. The cases sent shockwaves through HOAs across Texas. Suddenly, boards were much more careful about permits, easements, and property rights. Several state legislators even proposed new laws to strengthen protections for property owners against HOA overreach. I became something of a folk hero in certain circles, which was weird and uncomfortable. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to run my ranch in peace. Life slowly returned to normal. My cattle settled down once the trail was gone, and the daily chaos ended. Duke stopped being so anxious all the time. I repaired the fences, fixed the damage to my equipment, and got back to the actual work of ranching. Jackson stopped by one evening, about 6 months after everything ended. We sat on my porch with beers, watching the sunset over the western pastures. "You think they learned their lesson?" Jackson asked. "Probably not," I said. "People like that think they're always right, but at least they can't hurt me anymore." "You going to keep the gates?" I'd thought about that. The trail was gone, so there was no need for the gates anymore. But I'd grown attached to them. They represented something important, the principle that my property was mine. And I got to decide who used it. "Yeah," I said. "I think I'll keep them." Good reminder. Of what? That boundaries matter, that rights matter, that sometimes you have to fight, even when it's hard. Jackson raised his beer. To fighting the good fight. We clinked bottles and drank. 6 months later, I got a letter from a new HOA president at Prairie Vista. Her name was Melissa Carter, and her letter was respectful and professional. She explained that the new HOA board wanted to rebuild community relationships and wondered if I'd be willing to meet with them to discuss any concerns I had about the subdivision's impact on my ranch. I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Fredericksburg. Melissa showed up with one other board member, a young guy named David Park. They were nothing like Brenda and her crew. "Mr. Quentin, thank you for meeting with us," Melissa said. "I want to start by apologizing again for what the previous board did. It was wrong, illegal, and inexcusable. I appreciate that. We're trying to rebuild the HOA's reputation and relationships. We've implemented new policies requiring full legal review before any project that might affect non-HOA properties. We've also established better communication protocols." "Good," I said. "That's how it should have worked from the beginning." David spoke up. "We wanted to ask if there's anything we can do to be better neighbors. Not asking for anything from you, just wondering if there are concerns we should be aware of." I thought about it. "Keep your residents off my property. Control your dogs. And if you ever want to discuss anything that might affect my ranch, talk to me directly. Don't go through the county, don't get lawyers involved first. Just talk to me like a neighbor." "We can definitely do that," Melissa said. We talked for another hour, and I left feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe the nightmare had actually taught Prairie Vista something valuable. Time passed. My ranch prospered. Cattle prices improved, and I had a good year financially. I used some of the money the HOA had been ordered to pay me to finally upgrade my irrigation system and buy some equipment I'd been putting off. Duke got older and slower, eventually passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 14. I buried him on a hill overlooking his favorite pasture and got a new cattle dog, a younger pup I named Scout. The gates remained, occasionally needing a coat of paint, but otherwise standing strong. Every time I drove past them, I remembered the fight, the stress, the victory. I remembered that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. A couple of years after everything settled, I was invited to speak at a property rights conference in Austin. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my thing, but Chen convinced me it was important. "Your story matters," he said. "There are thousands of property owners fighting HOAs right now. They need to hear that it's possible to win." So I went. I stood in front of 200 ranchers, homeowners, and property rights activists and told them my story. I talked about the morning I saw excavators on my land. I talked about the legal battle, the vandalism, the threats. I talked about the gates and what they represented. "The thing is," I concluded, "this was never really about a trail. It was about whether we still have real property rights in this country, or whether groups like HOAs can just take what they want because they have lawyers and money. Judge Rodriguez said, 'Rights matter more than convenience. That's what we have to keep fighting for.'" The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people came up to share their own HOA horror stories and thank me for fighting back. One older woman grabbed my hand. "My HOA is trying to force me to tear down my garden because they say it's not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. Your case gave me the courage to fight them." "Good," I said. "Don't let them push you around." Driving home that night, I thought about how strange life could be. I'd never wanted to be a symbol or a hero. I just wanted to protect my land and my livelihood. But somehow, in fighting that battle, I'd become part of something bigger. I pulled up to my ranch gate, the main gate, not the trail gates, and sat there for a moment in my truck, looking at the land my grandfather had built, my father had maintained, and I'd defended. 300 acres of Texas hill country, rocky and beautiful and absolutely mine. My cattle grazed peacefully in the moonlight. Scout barked from the porch, excited that I was home. This was worth fighting for. Every acre, every right, every principle. The HOA had learned that the hard way, and I hoped their lesson would echo for a long time to come. I drove up to the house, let Scout jump all over me, and went inside to sleep in my own bed, on my own property, with my own boundaries intact and my rights defended. Sometimes you have to install steel gates and lock them. Sometimes you have to stand up to people who think their desires matter more than your rights. Sometimes you have to fight the system, even when the odds seem impossible. And sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn enough, you win. The gates still stand today, a monument to one rancher's refusal to back down and a reminder to anyone who sees them that property rights aren't just words on paper, they're principles worth defending, no matter how powerful the opposition or how long the fight takes. Brenda Patterson served her 6 months and moved away from Gillespie County. I heard she ended up in Houston, far from the HOA she'd destroyed with her arrogance. Gerald Foster lost his real estate license over the conviction and had to find a new career. Sharon Lewis quietly disappeared from public life. Prairie Vista continued on, now run by reasonable people who understood that being part of a community meant respecting everyone's rights, not just the rights of HOA members. The subdivision never rebuilt their trail, and the residents found other places to walk and exercise. As for me, I continued ranching. I raised cattle, fixed fences, and watched the seasons change over land that had been in my family for generations and would hopefully stay that way for generations more. The steel gates never came down. They weren't just barriers anymore. They were symbols of property rights, of the rule of law, of one man's willingness to stand up against institutional power and win. And every time I locked them at night, I smiled, remembering the satisfaction of that first evening when I'd installed them and claimed back what was rightfully mine. The HOA had paved a walking trail through my ranch, thinking they could get away with it. They thought wrong. I installed steel gates and locked them that night, and in doing so, I drew a line that meant something. A line that said this far and no further. A line that said my property, my rules, my rights. And that line held.